Chop chop. Hey everybody. Welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Kit. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we're about to find out what happened at Ape Mountain or something like that. Ape Canyon to be more precise. In 1924, when a group of coal miners or miners said they were attacked by human-like creatures. Apes together, strong as they should be all the time, every time. So let's enjoy this video from a Roanoke Tales in a 3, a 2, and an uno, and how apropos this is for All Hallows Eve. Actually, this is recording just a few days before Halloween, but nonetheless, let's enjoy this video in a 3, 2, and uno. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Islands hide more than just snow and stone. Beneath its towering ridges, the wilderness grows thick and restless. Forests that seem endless, rivers that cut through the rock, and canyons so narrow that sunlight barely touches the ground. It is a land both beautiful and unforgiving. A place where people can vanish and stories can take root. One such place is known as Ape Canyon. Its name does not come from maps or from the mountain itself, but from a night in 1924 when a group of miners reported a terrifying encounter. They claimed that they were attacked by massive ape-like creatures, an event so strange it became known as the Battle of Ape Canyon. Nearly a century later, the mystery has actually never faded, leaving behind questions that still haunt the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And considering that I'm going to be disappearing out there from probably October 18th to November 4th, I guess I'm going to go to Ape Canyon and see what happens. Today we'll talk about Ape Canyon and explore how this remains one of the Northwest's most strange mysteries.
That alien, okay, listen, not going to hate on the intro. I think it's cool. The alien looks a little high in this video. He's like, whoa, I can't believe I saw that.
Long before miners ever came to the shadow of Mount St. Helens, the people of the Northwest already told stories of strange beings said to live within the high mountains. Among the Kalaman and Cowlitz tribes, there were warnings passed down from the elders about a race called the Siatic. These were not ordinary people. The Siatic were described as towering figures standing 7 to 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in thick, dark hair, almost like animal hides. To those who saw them, they did not look human at all. The stories told that the Siatic were more than just large and strong. They were said to carry powers that made them dangerous in ways no warrior could match until modern day. That's right. Some could place spells.
That's right. Heavy machine guns, armored vehicles. That's right. Don't mess with humanity. But seriously, why are there always tales of giants in different countries, just like dragons? Perhaps maybe at one point they did exist. Maybe.
On those they met, turning strong hunters weak. Others could cloud their mind, as if hypnotizing the person into doing their will. There were even whispers that a Siatic could kill by thought alone. The tribes also believed the Siatic could speak to each other without words, using only their minds. That would explain why they could kill you with just their minds. They could throw their voices into the forest, copying the calls of animals to confuse hunters. Their sense of smell was sharper than any hound, and their ability to blend into their surroundings made them almost invisible and extremely dangerous opponents. The Siatic were said to live deep in caves during the day, keeping away from the sun. At night, they would come out to raid villages, stealing dried meat and fish. Some tales went further, saying they sometimes carried off women who were unlucky enough to cross their path. Because of this, most tribes kept their distance. The Siatic were seen as dangerous, unholy, and best just to be left alone. Over time, sightings would become fewer. Many began to believe that Siatic had just died out or had moved deeper into the wilderness. But even after the stories grew quiet, hunters still found enormous footprints in the soil from time to time, reminders that the legends might not be gone after all. Nearly 40 years after the famous story of Ape Canyon, the mountain gave rise to another mystery. In 1963, a group of 4 mountaineers were actually making their way down the slopes of Mount St. Helens.
Okay, 1963.
They stopped at a rocky formation known as Dog's Head, where one of the men, Jim Carter, stayed behind to take a photograph of his friends as they continued ahead. But Carter would never rejoin them. When others grew concerned and climbed back to check, they found unsettling signs. In the snow near Dog's Head lay Carter's box of camera film, discarded as if dropped in a hurry. The snow showed clear marks of a struggle and then ski tracks leading away. The tracks kind of told like a bit of a strange story. Instead of following these safe, steady route down the mountain, Carter's path veered sharply off course. His skis cut into wild turns, racing downhill in a reckless, dangerous pattern, as if he were fleeing something unseen. The trail ended suddenly at the edge of a steep cliff. A search team combed through the canyon floor for about 2 weeks, but no body was ever recovered. The strange disappearance of Jim Carter echoed what had been told decades earlier, the story of the 1924 miners who claimed they too had been driven to terror in these same mountains. At that time, the town of Kelso, Washington, sat at the center of
Kelso from that 70s show.
a rough frontier life. With its busy logging camps, gold prospectors, and endless taverns, the town earned the nickname Little Chicago. It was a place where fortune seekers and
Well, little Chicago, big Chicago loves you. I love this video already.
wanderers gathered and where wild stories often took root. In fact, pretty much everything in Washington at this point was pretty bad. Seattle, for instance, may have just been one giant whorehouse. That's just kind of how it is. I don't know. It was pretty crazy back then. Anyways, among the prospectors working in the area that year
Sounds like fun times.
was a group of 5 men. Their leader was Marion Smith, joined by his son Roy and 3 companions, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson. Together, they built a small cabin near the Lewis River, using it as a base for their search for gold. At first, their days had passed without trouble, but soon, the men began to feel that something was wrong. They spoke of a heavy sense of being watched, as though hidden eyes followed them through the trees. Around their cabin, they found
What could go wrong?
mysterious tracks pressed into the soil, some as long as 14 inches with 4 blunt toes. Sometimes they caught a quick glimpse of a tall figure moving through the forest. It walked upright like a man, but its size and shape were nothing human. The unease would continue to grow, and the miners realized they might not be alone in the wilderness. The sun was lowering behind the trees when the miners had set out that Friday afternoon. They had eaten a late meal and decided to climb further into the hills to pan for gold before nightfall. The forest was quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ears. And whenever you don't hear small animals or insects or something like that, just know that typically means a predator is nearby. So now you have an idea of when you're in the woods, you need to be hearing noises. If you hear nothing, it might be time to sharpen a spear. So as they moved along the base of the mountain, their paths suddenly stopped them cold. From a narrow ravine ahead, 4 massive figures stepped out of the shadows.
Yo.
The men froze where they stood. The creatures were like nothing they'd ever seen before. Each stood nearly as tall as a doorway of a cabin and weighed close to 400 pounds. Their bodies were coated in thick, tangled black fur. Their shape was almost human, but their size and movement felt closer to giant apes. For a long moment, no one moved. The forest held its breath, and the miners stared at the creatures, and the creatures just continued to stare back. Fun fact, if these are in fact apes, you probably shouldn't stare at them. Think about
Gorillas don't like that.
a silverback gorilla, right? You want to show the whites of your eyes because it shows non-aggression so that you don't get your arms ripped off. But then one of the giants took a heavy step forward. It threw back its head and let out a deep, thunderous roar that shook the air around them. The sound rolled through the trees, echoing off the rocky cliffs. Panic swept through the men. Some stumbled back, tripping over each other in fear, but Fred Beck did not run. His hands gripped his rifle, and almost without thinking, he fired, which, to be honest with you, probably would have done the same thing. The first shot struck, then another. The creature kept moving. You gotta aim for the head. Beck fired again and again until
Headshot. Only thing that matters.
his 4th bullet hit its mark. With a violent crash, the giant fell sideways, tumbling into the ravine. The other 3 creatures erupted in screams, their voices sharp and furious. The men, overcome with terror, turned and then fled. Branches whipped against their faces as they pushed through the trees. But the danger was not left behind. As they would run away, they saw shadowy shapes slipping out of the caves and cracks in the rocks around them. More figures, tall and dark, seemed to be moving in the distance. The miners realized this was no chance meeting. There were more of them out there, and apparently it takes a lot to bring them down. And now, they were being hunted, or at least vengeance was being sought. The miners then reached their small log cabin as the sun fell behind Mount St. Helens. Their breaths were sharp, their nerves raw. They had seen too much to sleep and too little to feel safe. Inside, they worked quickly. The doors and windows were barricaded with heavy planks. The men checked their weapons, rifles, pistols, and even axes, anything that might help them survive what they feared was coming. That night outside grew still. No crickets, no owls, only silence. Then from the dark forest, it began. A deep shaking thud hit the cabin wall. The logs groaned against the force. Another crash followed and another until the small structure trembled with each blow. From outside came the sounds of roars and howls circling.
Huh. Well, I mean, that's gotta be a frightening experience. Where's the other where are your fighting holes? Where are for your rifles, your bullets to shoot?
And closing in from every side. The men clutched their weapons, shadows moved against the moonlight. Then suddenly, the door splintered inward as a massive arm pushed through the barricade. One of the creatures was trying to force its way inside. Shots would ring out, wood cracked from the bullets. One miner swung an axe, striking near the reaching arm. The creature shrieked and withdrew, but the attack did not stop. The cabin would shake again, but this time from above. Heavy blows rained down from the roof. Logs were kind of just beginning to split. Small holes appeared, opening the inside to the night. Then,
no.
with terrifying force, rocks and even boulders began crashing through. One stone struck Fred Beck squarely in the head. He dropped to the floor unconscious while his friends fought on without him. For nearly 2 hours, Beck lay motionless as the others fired upward through the holes, their bullets flashing against the night sky. Also, if you get knocked out for more than a few seconds, that usually indicates some level of brain damage. The creatures were relentless. Their voices rose in furious screams echoing across the canyon. The miners held their ground, gripping their rifles until their arms ached. Every shot was answered by another roar, another pounding strike. But at last, after what felt like forever, a faint light touched the horizon. The sounds outside began to fade. The howls moved deeper into the forest. The pounding stopped. When dawn finally broke, the cabin was torn and battered, but its walls, even scarred with holes and stones scattered across the floor, still held. Slowly, cautiously, and probably horrifically, the men stepped outside. The forest was silent once again. By the time the miners stumbled into Kelso, they looked nothing like the men returning from an ordinary trip. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale, and their hands still clutched their rifles. They spoke in quick, broken words, each man trying to explain what had happened in the canyon. Inside a local tavern, their stories spilled out. Patrons listened in silence at first, but soon the room filled with whispers. The tale of a midnight battle with giant hairy creatures was too strange to ignore. Word spread through the town like absolute wildfire. The story reached the ears of State Park Ranger J.H. Huffman and Bill Welsh. Curious and cautious, they agreed to travel back with Fred Beck to see the site for themselves, who apparently didn't have brain damage at this point. And when they arrived at the ravine, the rangers searched for the body of the creature Beck claimed to have shot. But there was nothing. No body, no blood, only empty space and a scattering of spent shell casings. Pretty much indicating that something did happen there. Then, they turned to the cabin. What they found seemed to echo the miners' account. The roof had been smashed as if heavy weights had fallen through. Inside, the furniture lay broken and large rocks were scattered across the floor. Outside, in the dirt, they discovered footprints. Huge, human-like, and far too large to belong to any man. The evidence was puzzling, and soon the newspapers got a hold of the tale. Headlines called it the Battle of Ape Canyon, and then the name would stick. Within weeks, tourists, adventurers, and curiosity seekers began traveling into the wilderness, eager to see the site for themselves. Some came hoping to catch a glimpse of the creatures. Others came to prove it was all a hoax. But the canyon itself remained silent, holding its secrets in the shadow of Mount St. Helens. The Battle of Ape Canyon has lived for a century in the uneasy space between folklore, eyewitness testimonies, and speculation. The story is gripping enough on its own, 5 miners trapped in a small wooden cabin, besieged through the night by hulking inhuman attackers, literally fighting for your life, real Helldivers 2 sort of deal. But as with any extraordinary claim, the real
Helldivers, this time instead of bugs, robots, and mystic aliens, you got giant apes too.
question remains. What truly happened on that summer night in 1924? Well, in the 1950s, more than 30 years after the original incident, the Seattle Times ran an article that seemed to bring the mystery to an end. According to the report, several former members of a YMCA youth group at a nearby Camp Meehan admitted that they had staged the attack on the prospector's cabin. They claimed they had been on the mountainside the night of July 11th, 1924, and they just happened to attack this thing getting shot at. Okay. All right, guys. So seeing or hearing the miners below, they decided to play a prank. From the high ground, they rolled rocks down onto
Okay, well, it seems like a prank too far.
the cabin roof, which is incredibly stupid. They shouted, whooped, and made wild noises that echoed in the canyon, creating the impression of terrifying creatures closing in. To them, it was just mischief. To the prospectors, tired, frightened, and armed, it became a nightmarish siege. This explanation on its surface seems quite neat. It accounts for the sounds, the falling rocks, and the panic. In rural communities where pranks between groups of hunters and miners were not all that unusual, it could even sound quite plausible. The hoax claim is often paired with another suggestion, though, that the miners had been drinking heavily either before or during their stay at the cabin. Alcohol might have made them more paranoid, more likely to misinterpret ordinary noises as something monstrous. By the time they staggered into Kelso the next morning, dirty, disheveled, and exhausted, their story had grown into the Battle of Ape Canyon. For skeptics, this remains the simplest answer. People misperceive things, especially in stressful environments. This is sort of like
I'm gonna say a mixture of here's what it sounds like. Okay, it was a mixture of mischief, alcohol, and maybe some illicit illegal drugs. Put all those three things together, you got a recipe for disaster because you could be hallucinating and everything else.
why eyewitness accounts in court are kind of taken with like a grain of salt because the brain can actually make up things, but fear spreads quickly in small groups. Add alcohol and isolation in the wilderness, and hallucinations or exaggerations are totally possible as a, event that happened. Yet this explanation raises as many problems as it solves. First, the cabin itself was undeniably damaged. When State Park Rangers J.H. Huffman and Bill Welsh visited the site with Fred Beck, they saw the destruction firsthand. The roof was smashed in. Furniture inside was broken and scattered. Large rocks and boulders littered the floor. Skeptics argue that the YMCA pranksters might have rolled rocks from above, but here's the problem. The stones inside the cabin were not small. Some were so large, it would have taken significant effort or great height and momentum to get them inside. Could boys or young men really have hauled
Did they make a trebuchet or a catapult? Maybe.
or rolled such massive objects with enough force to crash through the roof? If so, why would they risk injuring the miners so seriously? A prank designed to scare should have not escalated into something that actually might kill. Second, there were footprints. Rangers took impressions of the unusual tracks near the cabin. These prints were large, up to 14 inches long, and showed 4 stubby toes. They did not match the boots of the miners nor the shoes of typical hikers. Skeptics have argued that these could have been faked. Indeed, some critics later demonstrated how handprints or carved wooden feet could replicate strange tracks, but the footprints in Ape Canyon were not just isolated marks. They surrounded the cabin in large numbers. To fake them would have required a sustained effort, carried out in rough terrain, with no guarantee that anyone would ever discover them. If it was a hoax, it was a remarkably elaborate one. Finally, there's the issue of testimony. Over the years, Fred Beck and his companions gave accounts of the events that were detailed and consistent. While minor differences appear, as in any story retold across decades, the core of the narrative remained the same: an encounter, a firefight, a night-long siege, and a battered cabin. Critics argue that the miners may have simply agreed to stick to their story, either out of pride or fear of ridicule, yet maintaining such unity over 30 years without anyone breaking ranks is quite unusual. Hoaxes often fall apart because someone talks. Here, the central claim held firm. If skepticism leaves question, so too do the beliefs of Fred Beck himself. For Beck, the story of Ape Canyon did not end in 1924. It became the foundation of a lifelong conviction of what he had encountered was not only real, but part of something much larger. At first, Beck and his companions described their attackers as beasts. They spoke of gorilla-like figures covered in thick black hair, weighing perhaps 400 pounds. To them, these were savage but physical creatures, perhaps an undiscovered species living in the remote wilderness. But as the decades passed, Beck's views kind of changed. In the 1960s and 1970s, he published pamphlets and gave interviews in which he described the attackers not as mere animals, but as interdimensional beings. Beck
Interdimensional beings. Okay, this is getting crazy now.
argued that the Yeti in the Himalayas, the Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest, the Yowie in Australia, were not separate mysteries but connected phenomena. A single hidden truth ran through them all: that our world is not alone, and that other realities sometimes bleed into it. According to Beck, this explained why the creatures were so difficult to track. They appeared suddenly, left behind footprints or evidence, and then vanished just as quickly. Traditional hunting or searching would never capture them because they were not bound to the same physical rules as ordinary animals. To mainstream science, such claims were far outside the bounds of credibility, but to believers, Beck's ideas offered a way to reconcile centuries of stories that refused to go away. Today, the story of the Ape Canyon still divides people. Some see it as proof of a hidden species, others believe it points to something far stranger. Some supporters believe the creatures could be a surviving kind of ancient ape, perhaps related to Gigantopithecus, a giant primate thought to have lived in Asia.
See, now that I'm willing to bet that when ancient humans did run into Gigantopithecus, when it was still around, at least Homo erectus did. Don't laugh. I'm pretty sure the legend of these giant ape-like creatures were then spread across the world like wildfire of these giant apes. And if it was Gigantopithecus or maybe a subspecies or maybe a distant cousin, I mean, there'd be some fossil remains showing. I mean, we still are able to find mammoths and mastodon fossils here in North America and Canada and the USA. We're able to find other large prehistoric fossils here. There should be. I mean, yes, I know the fossilization process is extremely difficult, but something would have indicated that there was at least an ape-like species here in the United States. And I don't want to say no, but I don't think even the prehistoric North American environment could have sustained a giant ape. Yes, humans are cousins of apes, but I don't think so. What do you think?
They suggest that these beings might have crossed over land bridges long ago when continents were still connected and somehow survived in the most remote forests of North America. From the indigenous perspective, the answer lies in legend. For tribes like the Kalam and Cowlitz, the creatures were thought to be the cursed descendants of wild men, humans who turned away from society and were changed into something monstrous. Their height, their hair, their strange powers were seen as a result of this curse, marking them forever as dangerous beings to be avoided. What happened in Cave Canyon has never been solved. No one has ever found bones, bodies, or undeniable proof of these creatures. The claims of a hoax do not explain the cabin damage or the enormous footprints, and the cryptid and paranormal theories remain only just that, theories. Fascinating, but unproven. Still, the mystery lives on. Ape Canyon has become one of the most famous Bigfoot legends in the world. Cryptozoologists study it, skeptics question it, and hikers who pass through the shadow of Mount St. Helens still feel the pull of the tale. The legend of Ape Canyon shows how the wilderness can hold secrets, secrets that no amount of searching has yet to explain. Some mysteries remain unsolved, some questions stay in the dark, and perhaps that is why the story continues to haunt us to this day. But as always, I like to break in at the end here. People say they enjoy that, so
Hmm. I don't know. I don't think it's an interdimensional being. I don't think it's intergalactic mystery. I think it's just really a mystery of, okay, something happened, but press X to doubt.
raise hell, praise Dale on that front. Let's first start with a discussion of Gigantopithecus versus possibly something Homo erectus. So, on my other channel, Roanoke Gaming, I actually did a video very recently discussing just this. I believe it was Dawn of the Beast, and essentially it was the idea that, and I want to give it away, you should go watch it. Go watch my Dawn of the Beast episode. It just came out. It's the brand new video on Roanoke Gaming. Good to go. There's science in there as well. Now, the problem with this being Gigantopithecus is Gigantopithecus actually was mostly, they hailed from orangutan or an ancestor of orangutan. So they were not truly bipedal. They were more, they walked on hands and feet, sort of like gorillas do, or they don't have the same type of foot. So the foot.
Plus, I'm really going to heavily doubt like these ape-like creatures that were mostly adapted to the tropic heat of India, China at the time would have survived the arduous northern tundra of Russia and Canada and North America at the time.
That was actually at the cabin would seem to indicate its plantigrade structuring. So plantigrade is kind of how our feet look. They're meant for walking and running. So the reality of that situation is what you're looking more at instead of Gigantopithecus is you're looking at possibly Homo erectus. Homo erectus also left Africa way before Homo sapiens did, and Homo erectus would actually become Homo neanderthalensis in Europe, and they lived also out in Asia as well.
Also, Homo sapien hobbitus, the hobbit. That's right. There were hobbitses around.
Now, the point is that around this time frame, there was a land bridge that did open up between Russia and Alaska that many animals actually went over, and that's kind of where that happened. And around this time, actually, the islands that would go down to Australia were much more accessible and close. In fact, there is a large part of the continent that is just underwater around New Zealand, which then connected to Australia. So, could it be possible that Homo erectus could have built some type of boats? We know that they use tools. Could they have built boats like Homo sapiens did at some point? Personally, I think it's entirely possible, especially given that the islands were not as far from each other because the water levels were lower around this time frame and land bridges were opening up. You could actually see something like if you stood on the mainland of Asia and looked out, you might see other islands, in which case Homo erectus might be like, oh, I wonder if there's food out there. And then they build boats and they go out there and everybody's happy as they continue to spread. Well, as this happened, you have possibly pockets of Homo erectus living in North America, and then maybe you had pockets of Homo erectus living in Australia. Yeah, it's just, to me, it seems like possible that this could have been the case. Does that exist today? It's very unlikely. What people are seeing is actually Homo erectus, given the amount of time that has passed, and given Homo sapiens' propensity to just completely outbreed other types of primates. That's why, what is it, a large portion of human society has 1% of its genome being actually Neanderthal DNA.
See, now that I heard about, and one of my friends who did one of his, I don't recommend doing it. Don't do that DNA testing because that's a bad thing to do. Because then the government and private businesses and third parties have access to your DNA. That's nuts. But he was able to find out that apparently he's got some Neanderthal in him. He's got that Neanderthal in him, not that dog in him.
Which they now think possibly the autism gene comes from Neanderthals, which would make sense because Neanderthal actually was fairly antisocial, but they could be very intelligent. Well, at least that's what we assume. But the point is that is Homo erectus still out there in some form? I mean, it could be possible. We don't know everything that's in the wilderness, and we find animals that we thought didn't exist all the time. But what I do find strange is there's always stories, right? There's stories of things that exist all throughout human history, but we just don't necessarily give it the credibility it deserves. For instance, the Kraken, right? Everybody remembers the Kraken back in the day. Like ship captains would be like, yeah, there was this giant squid that attacked the boat, and there would actually be damage to the boat, but science at the time was like, no, it can't exist. The Kraken is just a made-up story. And then we found the colossal squid, which is known to actually try and sink boats.
Well, granted, the Kraken was known for just, bringing down the ships and being this giant beast. The colossal squid, I mean, I don't know if it could do all that.
But obviously it doesn't have the strength to pull boats under. It could pull small boats under, but even ships back in the day, like with sails and masts and all that stuff, it didn't have the strength, but it would actually sucker to the boat and it could damage the wood to a degree on the outside of it. So that would have been the Kraken back in the day. And here we have another situation where it's like, oh yeah, Bigfoot's out there, damage to the cabin. Could it have been Homo erectus to a degree actually damaging these areas, or not these areas, but these structures, or people seeing them? I think personally it is somewhat possible. I mean, I don't buy that Homo erectus is still around, but if you take Homo erectus, actually he was taller than man and to some degree. Like if man's like average height was between I think it was like 4'9" and some, like, I mean, my ex was 4'11", so it does happen. But if they were like 4'9" to around like 5'11" was average Homo sapiens. Homo erectus was actually usually around 6'1". They just didn't have as much of a range concerning their height. Well, no, they did. They had range as well, but they could be, their absolute height they could get to was taller than man. So if in today's, I guess, time frame, if Homo erectus is still out there to a degree, they may have different hunting techniques that allows them to have gotten larger. But also on top of that,
it could have been, not to mention, seeing as how possibly in a possible scenario, you know, a high protein diet, which means they'd have to be predators, which means they couldn't be growing, vegetables and fruits. So they had to be eating off the land, eating the deer and the bison and the moose.
if you take a colder environment, animals tend to get bigger. Look at an anglerfish, which is a terrible creature in and of itself. They're actually bigger than people think. Everybody's like, oh, they're like, small, but like a monkfish, anglerfish type of deal, which looks like an anglerfish. It's also equally horrible. They get pretty big, like 2 to 3 meters, which is like 4 to 6 feet. So God, I hate those things. But the point is, in colder environments, animals get bigger. So if you take a colder environment like the Pacific Northwest, if a Homo erectus tribe was living out there in the caves or something along those lines and nobody had really found them yet, well, you now have a species that is getting larger due to the cold. And then they interact with humans. So basically, if you took something that was like, I don't know, 6'5", and the average height of an adult male in North America is around 5'9", that is gonna be a staggering height difference, because that's going to be like you're going to be looking up at an angle at this thing like ugh. So the point is that while it doesn't actually take that much for them to appear bigger, it could be 6'5", and then you're going to be like, my God, this thing was huge. Now, I do want to address the YMCA allegations. First off, I think they're full of shit. Like, no, oh, it was a prank that we did. I don't buy that. What I think it is I think for some reason they wanted some level of fame. You get a bunch of young men together. I think that they were just talking absolute smack. I don't think they had
Yeah, not to mention, if somebody was being shot at, they would have said something. I mean, here's the thing. We've seen pranks go wrong. I mean, case in point, we live in this day and age of Instagram, Kick, Twitch. Well, Twitch is on fire. Twitch is going to be dead. But of influencers and people doing these nuisance criminal streams. I mean, look at what happened to Johnny Somali and Vitaly. I mean, pranks gone wrong. Oh, hell. And they thought they were pranking people and screwing around with people. And now they're dealing with serious jail time, potential jail time. Look at Vitelli. He does not look like that beefed up guy anymore. He looks thin as a toothpick. And Johnny, well, less said about old Johnny, the better.
anything to do with it. I think that they were just bullshitting personally. And that's because, again, you have young men in their 20s. They heard this story and they're like, oh, well, why don't we take credit for it? I mean, were they young men at the time of reporting this? It was a while later, so probably not. Or they may have even just been in the area. Who knows? But the point is that I seriously doubt they had anything to do with it. Now, is it an interdimensional being? No, I don't think it is either. I think an interdimensional being concept it's an interesting way to go about it, but to me, if Bigfoot exists, right, you have to look at his actual physiology. Bigfoot walks in true bipedalism. And true bipedalism, I mean, an ostrich can do that, and but when you take primate true bipedalism, you're looking kind of, especially the size, you're looking at something that could be related to humanity specifically. And to me, given the hair, the size, all of that stuff, you're looking at Homo erectus. And it's
Or maybe a subspecies, which then leads to a tragic tale. Or is that another thing? Yes, the wild wilderness of North America, the United States and Canada, especially in the northern territories, is wide and vast and beautiful. I'm actually right now checking out the Netflix series Untamed, which is so far first 2 episodes in scared that crap out of me. But nonetheless, let me just say this. We would have found maybe some kind of settlement or burial. I mean, yes, things do. I guess Mother Nature takes what belongs to her. Bones and meat and flesh melt away as the bugs and scavengers feast away. That's what happens to everything. Everything returns to the dirt. But something would have shown. I mean, even Homo erectus left tools behind.
most basic form. Now, like I said, could Homo erectus be living in a cave system? I think it's possible. I mean, it would be crazy that we haven't found them yet, but there's a lot of really remote places in general in the Pacific Northwest. And I mean, we even find uncontacted tribes in South America all the time, and they're still uncontacted because we're like, well, let's let them do their own thing. And the reality is, if they are truly uncontacted tribes, then it's kind of crazy. They don't know we've been to the moon. They don't know like everything about the world so far. They think that life is just kind of continuing like this. How much of a absolute mind screw would it be for them to like contact the actual like world in its state right now technologically and be like, oh, what? Like that would be insane. But regardless,
It would blow their mind if they saw smartphones. I mean, come on. They would look like witchcraft.
if we can still find uncontacted tribes of Homo sapiens, maybe there's an uncontacted tribe of Homo erectus out there. And granted, if you're trying, like, Homo sapiens would be somewhat stronger than humanity. That's just kind of how they would be bigger because they've been out in the wilderness. They would have more hair because those would have been the ones that were able to survive the colder areas. To me, it just seems like that is the most plausible thing. But the reality is that since we haven't found them yet, it still just remains something that's, I suppose, plausible or hypothetical at this point because we would need to find extraordinary evidence. Now, the footprints, yes, everything can be faked by man. It's pretty simple. But again, I don't think the YMCA guys had anything to do with it. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like as it helps get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on what
Okay, let's look at the bigger picture here. Okay, we're dealing with the wind, with windy legends in the north. What do I think? What do I think of this? What do I think of the story of the 8 men attack and the YMCA BS? I mean, maybe something happened. I mean, there's a lot of things left undiscovered in this world. Perhaps there are some gems out there of hidden prehistory or something that has survived the ancient times before man conquered the world. But we would have found something by now. So I'm willing to bet that there might have been a whole hodgepodge of, you know, many things that happened. Perhaps, pranks gone wrong, and, perhaps maybe it was people harassing and making fun of the miners. I mean, those miners could have been hallucinating on illegal activities, and perhaps they imagined the whole thing up. Perhaps those YMCA guys sold them some magic mushrooms or some powder, and they just were on a bad trip. I mean, it could have been a whole bunch of things. But I'll be skeptical here. I mean, I don't think it was 8 men. Apes together strong, but not this time. And by the way, I see someone here typing in the chat. As someone who's played pranks similar to those back in similar to this back in high school and college, I want to say one thing: once gunfire starts, the prank is done and the pranksters run. I don't believe for a second that those YMCA guys kept the prank up once these guys started shooting. Could have been something? Could it have been 8 men? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say it could have been more elaborate than that. Maybe not elaborate. It could have been people, drugs, alcohol, night, fear, alone, the wilderness, people's emotions getting the better of them. We have to be logical here. Watch, like a few days later, they're gonna find like a subspecies of Homo erectus somewhere in Canada or somewhere far up in an unreachable area, and be like, "Oh, see, the 8 men were real." Until then, I got to see it to believe it. I'm so sorry.